Welcome to the What Paramedics Want podcast series of Inside EMS, sponsored by Pulsera. Whether replacing radio reports, alerting specialty teams, or managing mass casualty incidents, Pulsera simplifies communication, one tool every day, regardless of the event. Well, here it is, and once again, it's time to go Inside EMS. I am your host, Chris Saballero, and with me always is the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. The ladies know he's the man with the power. Kelly Grayson, KG, what's going on in world famous Potsdam, New York? Are you in Potsdam, New York?
No, I'm north of there, about 39 miles. I'm in the frigid North Country, Fort Covington, about 4.3 miles from the Canada border.
Is it snowing there yet?
Is it what? No, it's not snowing. It's not snowing.
Just checking. But you'll get snow. You should get snow around Thanksgiving though up there, right?
Oh yeah, should. I won't be home for Thanksgiving. I'll be on the road again. So
Texas EMS?
Yep. It's Texas EMS conference and going duck hunting and sandhill crane hunting over the Thanksgiving weekend.
So they're letting you back in Texas then after all that mess you had?
Yeah, well, they have short memories.
That's good. Texas people, you never know.
Statute of limitations has expired, so I can go back.
So we've had a few weeks that we've been away. We've been traveling. We've had some, we were playing with COVID again. We had
kidney stones for me.
Went to conference, kidney stones, right? So we are back. We are live. We are bad. And this is the podcast that everybody else imitates. So we're going to give them something to imitate. But we've got another great show for you, as we always do. And I am going to let my good friend, Kelly Grayson, set this up for us.
Well, Nancy and I taught Pluck Lab and Airway Workshop in Sharon, Connecticut for the EMS Institute in Sharon, and had a nice turnout, had 45 or so participants. And one of the things we do in the Pluck Lab is we get it's experiential learning, get everyone a deeper view of anatomy and physiology by actually inspecting a heart and lungs and kidneys. And along the way, we did some advanced ventilation workshops and showed them how to bag a patient properly. And you'd be amazed how nobody knew how to bag right. And this is an issue we have identified. It's becoming more and more prevalent in the literature about how poorly we do BVM ventilation. And that's one of the things we're going to start focusing on in future classes. We're going to call it performance-focused ventilation. And you'd be surprised how bad people suck at it.
One of the things, Kelly, that I think is interesting is I think we are starting to see a difference in providers as we have now gone into a different generation. And what's interesting is I was talking to our good friend Ray Kemp, and we've had Ray on the show many a time, and he's our expert videographer. He is also the foremost expert when it comes to filming in public, and he has all those great stories that he shares. Yeah. One of the things that he was telling me, we were together out there in Vegas for EMS Expo, was he's been doing a lot of riding across the country. And what he's noticing is, and this may go into what you're talking about from bag valve ventilation, that the younger generation of EMS provider isn't even talking to the patient anymore, that they've lost their communication skill in delivering the highest quality of patient care that they can. And one of the things that I think is interesting now, as I hear that assessment from Ray, big EMS guy, been around EMS since, probably the Eisenhower administration. But when you now start to talk about this from a bag ventilation, and I know we want to go ahead and focus on this, is this generational?
I don't think it's so much a generational thing, at least as far as BVM ventilation goes. I think as a profession, we've generally sucked at it. And God knows I taught it. My students passed the skill station, but were they actually doing good ventilation? Now, to your point about them never talking to their patients, I witnessed this in that workshop. I witnessed an experienced EMS instructor talking about how she's teaching her students how to chart as they interview the patient, how to fill out their EPCR as they're talking to the patient. And I couldn't help but interject. I was like, I teach my students to have a decent enough memory that they don't have to divide their attention between the human being they're supposed to be caring for and a computer. I don't do that myself. I don't pick up a tablet until the patient care is more or less done. But the thing about the ventilation is Chris, we have been taught over and over and over how to do proper chest compressions in CPR class from the very beginning. And for the past 10 years or so, we've had to have live feedback on our CPR mannequins to the attesting to the depth and the rate of our chest compressions. But when was the last time you actually got feedback on how good you were ventilating? And that's the major thing. And there's quite a bit of research out there on this now, including some studies that have been published in circulation in the AHA's journal. And I think less than 40% of cardiac arrest victims had adequate ventilation. And by adequate, I mean detectable. Of the ones that had detectable ventilation, only a very small percentage had adequate rate and tidal volume. And we started looking at this, and we ordered some tidal volume trainers, some feedback devices to allow us to ventilate our mannequins and see how well we're doing. And none of the 4 faculty we had helping us teach this workshop, none of the 45 or so students, we'd start them off blind. Here, ventilate like you think you need to be ventilating and do your best at it. And then we'd hook them up to the feedback device and look at the rate and the volume. And nobody was giving the appropriate rate and volume throughout the
But what's
time.
the reason though? What was the cause?
Number one, they give too much. And this is gospel we've been preaching for some time, is that we overventilate people in cardiac arrest and just in general, because everyone except for a few forward-thinking people who have bought the right kind of bags have their standard adult BVM with a volume of 1,200 to 1,600 milliliters, when we know that an average adult tidal volume is 500. And we know the detrimental effect on your circulation that increased intrathoracic pressure causes. And overventilating causes increased intrathoracic pressure. So volume wise, we're using the wrong bags. And reading the literature, some people or some agencies are switching to their pediatric bags to ventilate adults now so that they can't overventilate. And we're using some smaller volume, really Cadillac BVMs from Mercury Medical that you can't overventilate, and it helps you with they have built-in PEEP and a manometer and everything else.
Why can't
but
you
almost everyone we encountered was overventilating by a wide margin.
Why can't you overventilate with those tools?
Because the volume of the one we're currently using we've tried them all. We gave everyone a chance to try some of the newer, latest generation BVMs, and everyone seemed to like this bag the best. First of all, the adult bag only has a tidal volume or the entire volume of the bag is a little over 500 mils. So if you do a good two-handed squeeze of the bag, you'll get your 500 mils. It also has a timing light. Everyone, when they count their ventilations, everyone seems to, even though they may be counting, under stress, you're going to count fast. And almost everyone says, oh my God, this feels so slow. But it's actually 1 breath every 6 seconds, 10 breaths a minute. And it's really just, I hesitate to call it idiot proof, because that will only inspire the next generation of idiots. But you just, hey, Mongo, bag when the light comes on.
But I think that one of the things that we do that's inappropriate is we're using our memory to bag, or now you've got a light to bag. The light's been around forever. But if we're hooking them up to capnography, we should be able to use the capnograph to give as many. I remember bagging people as many as 8 times a minute using a capnograph and keeping their CO2 where it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's interesting as we talk about this is when I was in EMS Expo, and I've always had a problem with bagging. I don't have very, very, very big hands. And one of the things of getting my hand around that bag was very, very difficult. Getting my hand around the mask and around the jaw, I had to use the C3 method to hook my fingers under the jaw and make sure that was secured. So I always had a problem with squeezing as much as I could. And a lot of times I would use it against my leg, to try to get as much tidal volume. But of course that was incorrect and I was wrong and overventilating the patient. But when I was at EMS Expo, they had a bag valve mask. I believe it was called the Butterfly. Have you seen it? And instead of it being a bag that you're squeezing, it's almost like a bellows. and you're actually squeezing it this way at like a bellows.
Cool.
And it was, I wanted to put my hands on it because I wanted to be able to check it out for my system. So I'm going to have to be able now to kind of find out where that was from. But now when we start to think about the tools that we're using this, as you said, we're going to pediatric bags. You know, one of the things, these bags haven't changed in how many years? And you would think now with the adoption of new tools for everything, we are starting to see a better volume or a better array of tools that we're using for bag valve ventilations. But, you know, I think it goes into the same mode that we've always talked about. How many times are we bagging people on the trucks now?
We're still bagging people and all the time. Well,
And
not
when's the
all the
last
time,
time?
but
When's the last time you bagged somebody?
a couple weeks,
When's the last time you bagged them before that?
couple weeks,
All right, so once every 2 weeks, 2 times a month.
okay. But as long as you're doing it well, that's the main point. And the thing is we traditionally don't give people the feedback they need to know what's a good ventilation, what's not a good ventilation. What were you taught to, what's your cue that you're getting adequate ventilations in CPR class?
Well, hang on to that. Let's go ahead and take a quick break so we can hear from
Alright.
our sponsor. We'll come back after the break and we'll talk about that question.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Pulsera scales to meet your dynamic communication needs. From routine patient alerts to managing large-scale emergencies, every responder and clinician connect seamlessly. Familiar yet powerful, Pulsera streamlines your response from routine transfers to regional disasters. It's one tool every day, regardless of the event. Discover more at pulsera.com. All right, here we are back. Kelly Grayson just posed the question before we went to break, and go ahead and hit us with it again.
So what was your cue, the cue we've all been taught to tell us we're giving adequate ventilations in CPR class or in a real human being?
Chest rise and fall.
Chest rise. Yet the research shows that even though tidal volume on average for adults is 500 milliliters, chest rise, you start to see chest rise at 250 milliliters. So we're underventilating the vast majority of our patients if we're only looking at chest rise. If people are fully squeezing the bag, they're giving far more volume than they're supposed to be giving, and that's causing increased intrathoracic pressure and a resultant decline in hemodynamics and coronary artery perfusion pressure and so on and so forth. They actually tried that for 5 years or so in the AHA guidelines when we were doing passive ventilation or passive oxygenation in cardiac arrest, and it didn't work so well. But the one thing that we've never been doing well is ventilating. So what we're focusing on now is giving our students real-time feedback on not only the chest compressions but the ventilations as well. Now you mentioned capnography, but we had 45 people in this class and none of them are paramedics. They're all EMTs or perhaps advanced EMTs. They're the ones, especially in our volunteer communities, are working the call for perhaps quite some time before a paramedic arrives. They don't have the capnography. Now we were teaching them once the patient is hooked to capnography, you want to keep it here. Of course, that only is going to work if your patient has a perfusing rhythm and is actually producing CO2. Then you can shoot for 35 to 45. But how much is optimal if the patient doesn't have a pulse? That's what we don't know. So what we've been doing is using this device, this EOLife X tidal volume trainer, to give our students real-time feedback on how much they should squeeze the bag, how fast they should squeeze the bag, so on and so forth. Almost everybody over-ventilated the mannequin and under-ventilates the real patient. And in fact, some of these, the thinner patients start to show chest rise at 150 to 200 milliliters. So you're massively under-ventilating these people.
Well, let's get to the why, though. I mean, let's get to the why. So as you watched 45 people do this skill, what was the common thread that you could put your finger on to say, I think this is the culprit. I think this is the reason why?
Well, first of all, they're on the mannequins, they're over-ventilating. They need a smaller bag. need a smaller bag, no question about it. And we've been preaching this small volume adult CPR2 bag from Mercury Medical for quite some time. And the thing is that it's more expensive than your bare bones BVM that most people have, but it replaces two BVMs. You order it with the adult and the pediatric mask, and now you have one BVM doing the work of two. More or fewer and fewer people are using PEEP when they should be. This still hadn't trickled down to the masses.
Hang on there. Let me ask you this. I mean, you bring up a good point about PEEP. How does PEEP, or explain to the audience how PEEP works when you use a bag valve mask?
Okay. Well, PEEP is especially important when you have an advanced airway device in place, because PEEP is necessary for alveolar recruitment and retention. You and I sitting here having a conversation, breathing in and out, we maintain residual pressure in our airway of roughly 5 centimeters of water pressure. Our glottis will close at the end of exhalation and trap a little residual air in there, and that keeps those alveoli inflated. But you got somebody in extremis, if they're in particular very bad respiratory distress, they probably have some degree of atelectasis, alveolar collapse anyway, and using PEEP helps prevent that and helps reinflate those already collapsed alveoli. Because what people don't often understand is when you put a chunk of plastic between the vocal cords, they can't close their glottis at the end of exhalation. So their PEEP actually falls to zero. So we focus on providing at minimum a PEEP of 5 centimeters of water pressure, which is physiologic normal, and maybe go up from there up to 10 if you need to increase their oxygenation a little bit. We teach them the principles that, if you want to oxygenate someone better, there are two ways to do it. You increase the FiO2 or you increase the PEEP. If you want to manage someone's CO2, you increase the ventilatory rate. But just getting the message out that if you have a BVM in your hand, it needs to have a PEEP valve attached to it. That hadn't got to everybody. So we're including that in all of our classes as well. And I can still think of coworkers at Acadian who, until we had a class on it, they were opening up the Ambu BVM bag and taking the PEEP valve and throwing it in the garbage because no one knew what it was.
Exactly.
And I had to point it out to them. Hey, man, you should be really attaching that thing. So the lack of PEEP, the wrong size BVM, and the fact that people are still doing one-man bag mask ventilation. No, bag mask ventilation is a two-man job. It's hard enough to do two-man and do the proper volumes and rates. One man, while you have to maintain a mask seal and squeeze the bag at an adequate rate and depth, so we're really focusing on two-man bag mask ventilation and to do it right. So,
well, how are you going about this then? So when you start to talk about doing training classes, what's going to be your approach to this? And what do you say you're going to call the class?
Performance-based ventilation.
All right. So give us the premise of what that means, and then what's going to be the content of the class.
Well, this one was in conjunction with our pluck lab. So we got to actually demonstrate PEEP on actual lungs, but we're going to do this as a standalone as well. And the premise is everything you thought you knew about bagging is probably wrong. And if you want to improve something, you have to measure it. And if you're not measuring it, you don't know what needs improving or not. We've been measuring the effectiveness of our chest compressions. Now we need to be measuring the effectiveness of our ventilation to really give our patients the best chance at survival and cardiac arrest. So we're doing that. You're going to ventilate blind for a little while. We'll explain the physiology. There'll be a classroom section of it. And then the hands-on, we're going to use the various supraglottic airway devices and the various BVMs. And they're going to do it blind first. And then they're going to see it in real-time monitoring with the EOLife X and see just how well they are actually doing. So they can develop that muscle memory for, with my particular BVM, how much is a good squeeze, how much is not enough, how much is too much, and let them get as much hands-on time as we can.
So then after this class you did in Connecticut, and after you showed the proper way, how did the class do after that?
Yeah, very well. Generally within a minute or two of bagging through the EOLife X, they start to get the feel, and the device gives you a bar graph. Orange is not enough, green is just right, red is over ventilation. And invariably people were even with the small bag, were squeezing a little bit too hard and a little bit too sharply. And that's another thing we're trying to focus on is slow, steady ventilation, not a quick, sharp squeeze of the bag that builds up so much pressure that it overcomes the lower esophageal sphincter and causes gastric distension. They teach us, or American Heart wants us to give the breath over 1.5 to 2 seconds. And that's what it should be. And it takes them maybe a minute or so before they start getting the hang of it and keeping in the green throughout the entire thing. But after that, they've got it, that they now know what's a good squeeze of the bag and what's not.
Is sharply really a word?
Yeah, sharply. Squeeze the bag sharply.
Sharply. You're squeezing the bag sharply.
Yeah.
All right. Whatever.
When you squeeze the bag, you can squeeze a slow squeeze, or you can, clamp
But
it
is
down.
sharply the right word to use? I don't think.
Yeah, I think it is.
Whatever, man.
Forcefully. Okay.
Oh, there you go. I think that's better.
Forcefully, sharply.
It
I
does
think
sound like
sharply
it does sound
It's
like we have a
crisp and
clinical
fast and happens over a short period of time instead of a
Okay.
gentle squeeze. I don't know.
All right, good. All right.
Pick your own nomenclature, Cebollero. I don't care.
But it does sound like we have a clinical issue here, Kelly.
It is. It is. And I think that we hope these classes will take off. We got great feedback on this last one. We'll be doing another one, a repeat of that class at the New Jersey EMS Council's symposium in a couple of weeks. And we're going to start doing these multiple times a year, starting in the North Country and New York and moving it around. But you don't know how bad you've been doing it until you get some feedback on how you're doing it. So we're going to show them that they've been doing it wrong and then how to do it right.
Perfect. All right, man, let's go. Let's get up
Hey,
on out there, get ready for next week's show.
Yeah, that's what we think about it. We'd like to hear what you think. Do you get real-time feedback on how well you're ventilating a patient with a BVM? Have you heard of the EOLife X or performance-focused ventilation? We'd like to hear your thoughts on what your agency might be doing to make sure that you're giving the best breaths to your patient. For myself and co-host Chris Cebollero, thanks for tuning in to Inside EMS. We'll catch y'all next week.